Hello and welcome to Different Leaf, a show for new and experienced cannabis consumers. I'm Brit Smith. As of the start of 2023, residents in 37 states, 3 territories, and the District of Columbia with certain medical conditions can get a medical marijuana card. But not all state medical marijuana programs are created equal. So what does it take to become a medical patient in different states across the US? What's the access like to doctors, products, homegrow, and delivery options? And with more and more recreational dispensaries and CBD shops opening every day, what should would-be patients know about whether getting a card is really worth it? When I got my first medical marijuana card in Southern California, I went to see a doctor who was in a Hawaiian shirt smoking a joint, and he asked me if I had anxiety. I said yes, he signed a piece of paper, and I was free to order top-shelf marijuana to be delivered to my home for the next year. Granted, back in 2014, it was easy to get a card out west, but I had no guidance, and I ended up consuming way too much of the wrong stuff for what I was trying to treat. When I got to Massachusetts in 2017, there was a much more thorough doctor's appointment. I got my questions about dosing answered, and I had to wait a few days for the state to register me before I could visit a dispensary. Similarly, in other states, medical marijuana patients are having drastically different experiences with getting, maintaining, and using their medical prescriptions. In some states, it takes months to build a relationship with a doctor before you can get a recommendation for medical cannabis, while in others, it's a quick virtual call with a doctor somewhere in the state, and then you're all set to head to your local dispensary and buy whatever you feel like trying. Some patients, like those in Colorado, report getting really close guidance from knowledgeable doctors, whereas other patients, like many in New Hampshire and some in the southern states, are still relying on their friends, the internet, and their local bud tenders to guide them through their medical experience. So this episode, we're going to hear firsthand from 3 medical cannabis patients in 3 different states to understand what it takes to become a medical marijuana cardholder. We'll be talking about their experiences with the doctors, the costs associated with the appointments, the medical card, and the products, access to things like product selection, supply, and monthly limits, options that they each have for homegrow, delivery, and neighboring state reciprocal card programs, and whether they each consider it worth it to keep renewing their medical cards depending on where they live. First, we're going to hear from a conservative mother of 2 who uses cannabis for pain and anxiety in the Florida Panhandle. Then we'll check in with a patient in New Hampshire, where the surrounding states' legal cannabis offerings are proving pretty useful for their needs. And finally, we'll check in with a mom who is a cannabis caregiver to her son with epilepsy in the great state of Texas. You can also read up on the pros and cons that you should be considering when deciding whether a medical cannabis card is right for you, depending on where you live and what you need, by checking out my latest article on page 62 in the winter medical issue of Different Leaf, the magazine, which is available on thousands of shelves across the US and Canada at select Barnes & Noble bookstores, Walmarts, CVS pharmacies, and cannabis dispensaries. It's also available at differentleaf.com, and we'll be right back to chat with our Florida medical patient.
So I am a Christian conservative mother of 2, professional, and a medical marijuana cardholder, just a stone's throw from the state line of Alabama.
So tell me, how did you first learn about medical marijuana offerings in Florida?
So my family is very political, so I was well aware of it when it became a constitutional amendment. That may have been the first time, I believe it was in '08, that my parents and siblings and I were on opposite sides of the fence when it came to constitutional amendments. We were very in favor of it because just knowing the medical world, seeing what opioids were doing, having experienced pain meds ourselves, actually never having experienced any type of marijuana products, but it just seemed like common sense. So we watched that election very closely. And then I want to say it was perhaps 2016. I met one of the first doctors at my sister's open house in Tampa, Florida, who could prescribe because there were few doctors at the time that could prescribe medical marijuana.
Did you ask that doctor about how you could get a card?
So we didn't really have much time to chat then, but I just knew he was a friend of my sister's, and I had not at the time considered it for myself. And I didn't honestly have any questions right then. So I had heard it was a lengthy process and it seemed something cumbersome that I wouldn't be interested in doing at the time.
So, who opened your eyes for you about the possibility of medical marijuana being something that could be useful for you?
It was my sister. It was Thanksgiving 2021. So I'm a pretty new user and I was experiencing some intense pain. I had noticed a change in my sister's personality and in the way that she was handling things personally and professionally for the better. And she opened up saying that she had her card and she noticed I was in a lot of pain and offered me a couple of items to see if it would touch, knock off the pain. It did. I later found out I had dislocated a rib, so that was the amount of pain I was in. It's pretty intense. And it was also the encouragement of my husband. He thought my anxiety was off the chain and that I could I could help, I could benefit from it. And he was right. So that was kind of my journey when I learned how discreet it could be and that you could take a product and not be high. You could take a product and just feel better. And that was a difference for me.
So, let's talk about what you had to do to get your card. What was your experience with the medical marijuana doctor? What was it for? What ailments are you treating? And what does the card cost?
So that's the big thing in the state of Florida. It's just expensive. I have to say it's a little bit of a joke when it comes to the doctor. And I will put that in quotes very openly because you have to already have a prescribed condition, which in the state of Florida are a lot. Just about, I think any person could get it. The conditions that I was able to get it under was depression, anxiety, and insomnia, which I didn't realize I had already been diagnosed with, but my general practitioner had diagnosed me with that in 2020, which again, I think everyone could have been diagnosed with that in 2020 because I went to see him and I said, yeah, I'm really sad and I can't sleep. So he wrote that in my chart. That was all I needed to get the process started. It cost me $200 with the company that I used. I did a lot of Googling, and the company though was very easy to work with. They had everything lined up with the links that I needed to click to go to the state, which I think was another $185 to get my actual apply for my license. So we're up to close to $400 at this point, and I've not even bought a product. So I got my card, and then when I met, again, air quotes, with the doctor, it ended up being a telehealth, and it was a 5-minute conversation. The doctor was in Miami and he said, okay, I'm going to prescribe you. I got off the phone with him. I said, here, he saw my documentation from my general practitioner of my conditions and literally hung up the phone after 5 minutes. And 10 minutes later, I looked at my state profile and I had a prescription for topicals, smoking marijuana, and oral. And they were in large quantities that I still cannot comprehend.
So, you can do all those methods of ingestion, but there's purchase limits for each person per month, right?
Yes. And off the top of my head, I want to say the smoking that I'm prescribed is like 70 grams and oral is 400 milligrams, which I finally did the math because the state of Florida just made some changes to the law where you can only go purchase 70 days worth in one, or you can only have in your possession, I believe, 70 days worth of your prescription. And I was very nervous about that because there's one product that I really like that only one company sells and is constantly on back order. So when I see it, I stock up. And I think everyone else does that too. And so we're really helping that back order. So I was nervous about hitting that, but considering I think I take about less than 5 milligrams a day, and these pills are, 5 milligrams a day, I don't think I'm ever going to hit my limit.
How often do you have to renew your card? or prescription?
The prescription lasts for 7 months in the state of Florida, and then you have to go pay the $200 again, see the doctor. This time around, telehealth is not allowed, so I drove to a not terrible, but not really great area town, stayed in my car, rolled down my window. There's a doctor with a clipboard. He looks at my ID, introduces himself, and we have a 5 to 7 minute conversation back and forth. He renews my prescription.
Is that the normal way to see a medical marijuana doctor in Florida?
No, I think this is just this doctor. He's in the Panhandle perhaps 2 days a month, and he is in Miami. I believe this is a very good financial exercise for him.
So he's in Miami like 95% of the month. So who else could you have seen?
I know there's two others in town, but they were a little more expensive and not as easy of a process to go through.
So you said you had to renew the prescription after 7 months, but not the card itself?
Yeah, so your prescription lasts for 7 months, but your card lasts for 1 year. So you've got to keep track. So I've got to renew here coming up my card, and honestly, I don't know how much that is going to cost me. And then, yeah, I'm going to have to renew my prescription just to have the right to have the prescription. That's not even taking into account the cost of the product itself, which I have found to be pretty affordable, but it is cash only, of course. And each time I go to the dispensary, it's around a couple of $100.
Now, how long does a few $100s of product last for you? What does a product cost in Florida?
It surprisingly lasts me a long time because a month's supply of edibles I wait for the sales. It's about $15. And then I use a product called Thorough Gels, which is a CBD, high CBD count with low THC, and they're $45 on sale. And one of those containers will last a month. So around $60 a month, so $2 a day approximately. But you're stocking up. So it's whenever those thorough gels are in, it's $300 or $400 maybe if I'll go buy as much as I can.
Do you have the option of getting delivery to your home?
Yes, we do. But I don't know that I would do that really because I don't know if they have marked vehicles. I don't know that I would necessarily want my neighbors to know. My immediate neighbors all know and we kind of joke about it, but my neighborhood is a upstanding neighborhood. Most of the neighbors are older, retired. We're one of the younger couples. So I don't know that I would want that perceived stigma of maybe, oh, that's the pothead mom.
Yeah, right. That's not really something that you want your neighbors to know, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I work from home. So not everyone, they know I'm home. They don't know that I'm working. So that could be just another little tick in the box.
You have access to CBD, Delta 8, other legal options with less stigma, maybe. I don't know. But is it still worth it to you to maintain a medical marijuana card, or would you ever just stop it and just use what's on the legal CBD market?
It's funny you say that because I just started exploring that side because I was pretty ignorant. I would say yes, because what I found on the CBD side is it doesn't seem as regulated. And I've tried a few products that got me high. I had been using a THCV just to help with cravings and weight loss. And I had successfully used an entire package and thought, wow, this is the bee's knees. And then I got another package and I was super excited. I popped one, started working, could not figure out the math in my Excel spreadsheet. Still cannot figure it out. I don't know what I did to it, but I was higher than a kite. And here I am trying to function with year-end reports due and in meetings. And I had one coworker who understands me, and she also is a user, a medical card owner. So I was able to tell her via text message on my phone that I was high, and we were both giggling about it. Yeah, I had to keep that under wraps, and it was very uncomfortable. So that experience, I'm a little gun shy now because I don't want to accidentally pop a CBD product and then be at a presentation and not make any sense.
That's smart. It seems like legal marijuana is more closely tested and dosed than CBD products that you could get anywhere. So you mentioned before recording that you can't be a medical marijuana user at your company. Let's talk a bit more about that. It seems to be grounds to be possibly fired. Is that just your company's internal policy, or have you heard that being an impact for other Florida patients?
It's not just my company. I know my brother has shared this same concern because I was sharing with him the success that my sister and I had had, and he was concerned that he could lose his position if he used a product. I thought I was in the clear based off of just reading some of the policies that my company has. My company is pretty progressive, so I just felt I would probably be okay, but I had a situation recently where I became aware that perhaps I wouldn't be. And it wasn't me, it was a different coworker, used her product for pain. And due to his home situation, the wife got very angry and threatened to tell his boss. So he decided to self report just to take away that weapon from her. And I know both of these individuals very well, so I was aware of the situation. And his boss, on the down low, because he cares for this employee and understands the situation, also very sympathetic to marijuana medical card holders because his wife is one in a completely different state. But he discovered that even if he went through the process, got his card, because the position that this individual held, he would lose it in the company because of the access to various things. I have different access to things. And so for that reason, I was cautioned, saying, hey, this may not fully pertain to you, but understand it may. So just knowing that and hearing the seriousness in my friend's voice, I thought, I'm going to keep this under wraps.
So lots of places to buy from, plenty of sales, maybe supply's a bit of an issue, but you can't grow your own medicine at home in Florida, right?
Yes, and that's because the legislature made it excruciatingly hard to be able to grow. I mean, I think that's why it took them so many years to even open the first dispensaries. They were trying to figure out how to get their friends in to make the most money. But the joke was anytime something was being built in town, it was going to be a new mattress store. Now it's, oh, it must be the new dispensary because they really are everywhere.
And all those dispensaries are big companies, multi state operators like Curaleaf and Trulieve. Have you ever seen a cannabis dispensary in Florida that's owned by like a local person or a person of color, somebody who maybe was impacted by the war on drugs?
Yeah, and I don't even know if someone affected by the war on drugs would even go through the process, honestly, because it does feel daunting. And the conversations that I've had with several folks that I come in contact with, my hairstylist, even some of my close friends, it just seems not worth it to them to go through the process, much less the perceived stigma. And then when I'm in the dispensaries, what's really funny is they're typically white boomers.
The customers are old white people?
Yeah, the customers. I've seen one person of color. They were older, but every time I'm in there, I'm the youngest and Caucasian as well. So
Why do you think that is?
money and not scared to speak up, probably to their doctor or who routinely knows how to work the system, the medical system, because it is a bit of work.
Does it feel to you like since more people are entering the medical cannabis program, that Florida police officers care about weed anymore? Is it a concern for you when you're like driving around with it?
What is fascinating is because I was a part of a community program where we got to do like adult field trips to really interesting places, and one of them was the jail and the sheriff's department, and we saw demonstrations for their canine unit. They do not train the canines in the state of Florida to detect marijuana anymore. which I found interesting. And the deputies were very clear. They're like, listen, we don't really even care. And I found that kind of eye-opening and exciting that even they don't train the dog to trigger on that. So I think that's a sign of the times that perhaps they know, favorable or not, but they at least know that it's coming.
So, if anybody else in Florida is interested in getting a medical marijuana card, what would be your advice? And what would you say has been like the hardest part of being a patient where you are?
Go through it. It's definitely worth it. I would use your general practitioner to get some of those innocuous things on your record because it's cheaper. You're going to your annual checkups anyways, so just tell them how anxious you really are, or perhaps if you're having trouble sleeping, just be honest so that your doctor writes those down and that will save you. I think it was a $400 is what a consultation for a diagnosis would have been at a local place here. So that did save me money. And then Google, I used expressmarijuanacard.com and they were very easy to use. The biggest bummer I think I found is just learning the products, knowing what to use. I was lucky that I had my sister that kind of guided me through the process, but I would have been lost otherwise because just understanding what to use and for what purpose is very difficult. That's a really big gap because even when you go to the dispensary here, they're just kind of like, I don't know, what do you want? And when you're completely ignorant, I'm like, I don't know, I've never used it. That makes it difficult. But otherwise, it is 100% worth it. I did not realize, being someone who's had knee surgery, multiple dislocations, broken bones, and tries to be active, but I am overweight, so I have inflammation issues. It's enabled me to work out. It's enabled me to be a happier mother. Other than that one day, I think I'm a better coworker. So it's definitely worth it. And I didn't realize that at almost 40, I could wake up and not be in pain, which I think is an eye opening to most people, that we don't realize how much chronic pain we do live with. And if you're in that situation, it's definitely worth, if anything, going and trying some CBD products just to live life without pain.
Next up, we're going to head north all the way up to the live free or die state of New Hampshire.
Hi, my name's Zach, NH Canna patient. I am a medical marijuana card holder in New Hampshire.
What kind of area in New Hampshire do you live in? Are you near Massachusetts or near Maine?
Yeah, southern New Hampshire. Yep, so right near Massachusetts and accessible to Maine and Vermont. Really a good central location.
Nice. So let's talk first about how you learned about medical marijuana cards in New Hampshire. What was your first run-in with the idea of medical marijuana?
Yeah, so I grew up in New Hampshire. I went to college in Massachusetts where cannabis is very popular. I went to school right around the time they were talking about legalizing it and voting on legalizing it. So it was very popular in Massachusetts when I went to school. So I started consuming actually my freshman year in college, and it's something I talk about quite a bit when I open up about my cannabis consumption. It's kind of cliche, people think, you go to college, you're around cannabis all the time, why not? But my story started, I was a victim of domestic violence in college. I suffered concussion the freshman year. I was punched in the head a couple times. So I had these headaches quite a bit after, the concussion. My friends were like, hey, how about you just smoke some weed and see how it goes. And I did, and it helped with the headaches, and it also helped with how I approached, schooling. It helped my ADHD symptoms as well. I was getting, high scores in math that, I was previously not doing well in. And, in college, it really helped me in a lot of ways. So it opened up a lot of doors for me when it comes to cannabis. I started consuming, on a semi-regular basis. I never felt unmotivated. And it just helped me, be a better version of myself since I was still battling, those ailments with myself and developing other things as well along the way.
Gosh, I'm so sorry to hear about that, but so glad that you found cannabis and that it was helpful for you. So you didn't get your medical marijuana card until you moved back to New Hampshire, is that right?
Yes. So where was I going to go next? Was it going to be in Massachusetts still at the time? I still worked in Massachusetts. So it could have made sense, to still stay in Massachusetts where, it just became legalized and all that. But even if I did stay in Massachusetts, I was still going to explore the Massachusetts medical program as well. That was definitely on my radar. So wherever I ended up, medical marijuana was definitely on my radar. So when it came to researching New Hampshire, where I previously lived and graduated high school, I was looking into their medical cannabis program and what it was like. And at the time, it was very difficult to get your medical cannabis card in New Hampshire. You had to have a 3-month relationship with your doctor. You couldn't just go and meet someone and get your medical cannabis card that day. You had to have a relationship with that person for 3 months, go and meet with them so they can recommend it. Like that, that you had an established relationship. They felt comfortable giving you that recommendation.
Was it just a regular cannabis, is it a cannabis doctor? Is it just a primary care physician? Is it a specialist?
At the time, I believe it could have been, your doctor or, someone who specialized that was licensed in the state of New Hampshire to, I believe it's, certified nurses, doctors, and nurse practitioners, I believe. Any of those people could certify you, but you had to have a 3-month relationship with them. And then a little down the line, they passed legislation that allowed for same-day registration and certification. So you didn't have to have the 3-month relationship anymore, and it was very easy for people to go and get their medical cannabis card or certification that day and send in the paperwork and get their card in the mail. And when I moved back to New Hampshire, that's what I ended up doing. The same-day registration was around, so I found a practice in New Hampshire that met with me. I paid the registration fee, the appointment fee, and I had paperwork to submit to the state for my medical cannabis card. And at the time in New Hampshire, we had to select a single dispensary to go to. We couldn't go to any of the dispensaries in the state.
Wow.
But when thinking about that, all of the dispensaries in New Hampshire, as we talked about before, they're all kind of spread out. So depending on where you're located, it might be beneficial to be able to go to all the different ones. But, if you're kind of in a location where you're traveling, an hour plus to go try someone else's dispensary, and at that point, it's very expensive. Is it even worth it at that point? So a lot of the time, I don't really shop in New Hampshire. There's Maine, right across the border. They have a very flourishing medical program. They have caregivers that are able to open up small business and offer a wide variety of products for patients at a lower cost than, dispensaries in New Hampshire and stuff like that. So a lot of patients often find themselves, going to Maine, or depending on where they're located in New Hampshire, even Vermont now, going to their adult use, market, or depending on where they're located, even Massachusetts adult use market, just because of the lack of variety in New Hampshire and how much it costs. Even though I primarily shop in Maine, I have family in Maine. Even though when I visit them, I shop in Maine, I do go to the New Hampshire dispensaries a little bit, but I've had to stop just because the last time I went there, the quality, it was just not the greatest for what I was paying. It's really expensive, and the last time I went there, I bought an eighth of flour, and there ended up being 10 seeds in it. So it was just really poor quality.
That's not great.
Medical cannabis, and I ended up complaining and getting my money back, and even just getting my refund. It wasn't the greatest experience from the patient's perspective. So something that I've also been kind of pushing for is homegrow in New Hampshire. That would solve a lot of problems for patients.
Yeah, we will definitely touch on homegrow.
Yeah.
I want to step back a little bit and talk about the process of getting the card. Was it very expensive to do the applications for the card? You mentioned that the prices of the actual medicine are pretty high. What about actually getting your card? Do you have to pay annual fees? How much is it for the first time you get your card?
Yeah, so the first time I got my card, the registration fee with the state doesn't change. It's always been $50 to the state of New Hampshire for the application fee. It's just the doctor's appointments that you have to do that cost a lot of money. They're not covered by insurance, so you end up paying for the full cost of that appointment. And with that cost, it can kind of be costly, and that's where a lot of the barriers are. But lately in New Hampshire, a lot of doctors have been feeling a lot more comfortable signing those papers. So people are able to get those applications signed off on during their regular appointments. So it's becoming a lot easier today than it previously was right around when the pandemic first started in 2019.
So how much is an eighth on average in New Hampshire at the moment?
Depending on where you go in New Hampshire, it's really interesting because this is something I talk about quite a lot, because in the area that are right around where my dispensary is, the annual average income is right around $100,000 a year. And the dispensary in that town, they have tiered pricing. So they have platinum tier, a silver tier, and a gold tier. And there's various pricing within those tiers. The silver tier is obviously the lowest price. I believe that is around $39 an eighth, or 35, don't quote me on that. So like 30 to 35, 40 to high end $60 an eighth in the northern dispensaries, the northern New Hampshire dispensaries.
So that's pretty similar to Massachusetts. It's similar to a lot of states. It's between like 30 to $60 depending on what kind of flower you buy. But do you have a lot of options, a lot of variety of the kinds of medicine you can get up there?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of the popular cannabis products, the dispensaries have to keep up with it. So there are flower, I would say, is the most popular option in the dispensaries in New Hampshire. All of the dispensaries offer concentrates, rosin, BHO, edibles, and tinctures. The big talk in New Hampshire right now is for the dispensaries to carry more CBD options. So like smokable CBD flower. And with that, the dispensaries are introducing that at the same pricing model as their THC flower. And at that rate, it's very expensive. I remember I put out a tweet one time where the local dispensary put out pure CBG flower. So it was just flower grown, like hemp flower. That was just CBG. It was priced $60 an eighth, similar to their THC flower. And someone with a dispensary out in Colorado was like, I could legally ship you a pound of CBD flower for $200. So it's like, there's these options that are available, but they're not accessible to the patient. It's just very expensive for the patient in New Hampshire, which is where homegrow would come into play and help level out a lot of that cost in New Hampshire.
Yeah, it absolutely would. So we mentioned that there's not very many dispensaries within the state of New Hampshire. There are just under 20,000 patients at the moment, and everybody's very spread out. New Hampshire's pretty rural. I've been up there and driven around, and it's lots of mountains, and there's lots of space in between each other. So how close and how far might you be from your nearest dispensary?
That's the biggest issue for patients, is where they're located and how they can get to a dispensary. When we're thinking about medical cannabis, people could be homebound. They might not have access to a car. Getting to the dispensary might be a problem for them. And on average, you could be anywhere from 20 minutes to an hour, depending on a dispensary that might have a product that you can even afford. And even as the rising gas rates have been, the past year, just taking those drives to, Maine when I would go visit, it would be a lot of money, just because gas prices are fluctuating, and so is the cost of cannabis. And it's affordability is just a big issue, because a lot of the dispensaries that are in these northern parts of New Hampshire and these rural areas, they're charging the most for cannabis medicine, and it's driving patients to either leave the program or to find alternate ways of obtaining medical cannabis.
You mentioned that you cross over to Vermont or Maine to buy from their medical markets or their recreational markets. So in Maine, there's this reciprocal medical marijuana card system where you can go across, and anybody who has a medical card from other states is allowed to use it in Maine. Do you think that might be sort of threatening the New Hampshire market, because that seems so much more easily accessible than anything that they've got in New Hampshire at the moment?
Oh, it definitely is. You see the rising number of patients every year in New Hampshire. The program's not shrinking, it's growing. And the issues that patients have about the program, they're still voicing the same issues. It's always been affordability, accessibility, and, just transparency. Why does it cost so much for this cannabis? How is it grown? Why are there 10 seeds in an eighth of flower? How did that even hit the shelves? There's a lot of questions that patients have asked for years and years that haven't been answered. So Yeah, I would say it's threatening, but it's also something, New Hampshire could capitalize on. I mean, think about it geographically. New Hampshire is before Maine. If New Hampshire could fix a lot of the issues they have, they could really capitalize on this emerging industry that is cannabis in a lot of the different
Yeah.
ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you guys have delivery out there? Is that an option for folks who are homebound? No?
No, so we do not have delivery, but anybody could become a caregiver for a patient.
Hmm.
The barriers to become a caregiver are very low. There's no fee associated with that. All you need to do is have a patient that you would be a caregiver for. The only issue with that is finding people that want to be caregivers and matching them up with the patients that really and truly need it. But with that, the caregivers also need to be reimbursed in some way. They're taking gas, they're taking time out of their day to do the service. So that is something that also needs to be looked at as well with the caregiver system. But also, even with that caregiver service, the cost of cannabis is still very high. So it's just really just needs to be affordability, and homegrow would really help change a lot of those issues.
Yeah, we've mentioned this a couple times now. There is no home growing allowed in New Hampshire, and this is the live free or die state. So it's shocking to me that you're not allowed to live freely and grow yourself a plant. But since the law was signed in 2013, it took 3 years until there was even any dispensaries available.
Right.
What did everybody do during that time? They must have been growing their own or accessing the legacy market in some way.
Right.
I figure like New Hampshire's ready for home grow. What's the holdup?
That's the $1,000,000 question. Honestly, looking at it, ever since I've been a patient, this has been something I've been focusing on just because, as we've talked about, I was even looking at the Massachusetts medical program when I was figuring out where I was going to go after college. And Massachusetts patients have the right to home grow their own cannabis very comfortably. The thing is, it's not really opposed. That's the thing.
You mean by the residents of New Hampshire?
Yeah, and even the dispensaries. I think when we look at other medical cannabis markets and states, a lot of the dispensaries kind of fight home grow. Even the legal states, a lot of the established dispensaries, fight home grow. They see it as a threat to their business. In New Hampshire, medical advocates have gotten all 3 of the companies that operate in New Hampshire to testify in state Congress that they would support home grow and help patients along the way with home growing, whether it be classes, whether it be clones, whether it be seeds, whether it be testing, whatever. Dispensaries would support it. The only people that seem to have an issue with it are the prohibitionists that are still elected in office and the police union, who seem to oppose everything that has to do with cannabis in the state. They see it as a threat. They see it as a way for cannabis to flood the streets. But that's completely irrational because let's look at all of the border states. It's legal everywhere.
Yeah.
We're all just looking to grow our own medicine. But I'm optimistic for this year because for the first time, with all of the dispensary support, the Medical Oversight Board has said they would support home grow as well, which they wouldn't in the past. So I'm a little optimistic for medical home grow in New Hampshire this year, but hey, that's just me. I'm optimistic every year.
I can debunk the myth that you would be able to flood the market because I've been trying to grow cannabis for years and there's just no way you're going to grow stuff good enough that people are going to buy from you when they could cross over to Massachusetts, go to a recreational shop and then just drive themselves home. That's good weed in Massachusetts. We have good weed here. So I think that, home grow it's not really as big of a threat as a lot of folks think.
Yeah. For me as a patient, it's good education. It's good to see, what goes into growing plant and being a part of my medicine, essentially.
So with all of these logistical issues about accessing the medicine, being able to afford the medicine, living really far away from the medicine, still no home grow options, do you think that it's still worth it to get a medical cannabis card in New Hampshire? You have all these states surrounding you where you can just drive over and buy recreational weed. Should people really consider medical license in New Hampshire?
I do, because when we think about it, my consumption is medicinal at the end of the day. But that doesn't remove the fact that I think everybody consumes it, gets a medicinal benefit from cannabis. For me, it truly is medicinal. It's not something that I look at as like an after 5 o'clock thing to relax or to unwind. It's something that, helps keep me, focused and help treat ailments that I still have and that I deal with on a day-to-day basis.
Do you find that there's sort of accessibility to talk to your doctor about like dosing and products and those kinds of things? Do you get a lot of help and feedback on the medical side that you wouldn't get on a recreational dispensary side?
Yes and no. The access to my doctor, I feel, could be better, and the education with it at hand that comes with medical cannabis. A lot of, in my opinion, medical cannabis is really what you research and, what you're able to find out there. There's a lot of good forums for, medical cannabis that are backed by doctors. I follow, Peter Grinspoon. He's a great follow on Twitter. I read a lot of the articles that he puts out, and it's really just, a lot of the caregivers that I talk to on a day-to-day basis really help me to figure out, what works and what doesn't work for my specific ailments. If I didn't have that network, I don't know what I would do with, when it comes to figuring out what works and what doesn't work. But it's also just a lot of journaling, documenting how certain things make you feel, how you feel on certain days, really just finding out what works, but really surrounding yourself with a network of people can help that process along the way.
That's really good to know. Do you have any advice that you would give to other New Hampshire residents who are considering stopping going to the underground markets or the recreational markets in neighboring states and they're considering getting their medical marijuana card? Would you have any advice for them?
Yeah, so check out the NH Trees Reddit page. That's a great forum. It's made for patients and for like-minded consumers in New Hampshire to connect and discuss cannabis. There's a lot of information about how people go about applying for their card, how long it took them to get their card. I will say the amount of time it's taken me to get my renewal cards has taken less and less time over the years. Recently, they're turning around applications very quickly, so I will say that the time it takes to actually get your card has gotten faster. So I would say that the program is evolving and it is getting better for the patient in New Hampshire. There's a lot of great information on the NH Trees Reddit page where people go into detail about their experiences about getting their card and how they did it.
And finally, we're checking in with a medical advocate and mother just outside Houston about the medical cannabis program in the Lone Star State.
My name is Piper Lindeen. I am in Sugar Land, Texas. My son is a medical cannabis patient through the Texas Compassionate Use Program. We don't have cards. We just have a registry. He has it for severe epilepsy, Lennox-Gastaut syndrome.
I've had a lot of experience in Texas. It was my first place that I landed in America. That was about 2006 till 2011. In my time there was no cannabis, no medical cannabis at all. That's not to say there was no cannabis. There was a lot of cannabis. But there was no medical cannabis. It wasn't even a thought for most Texans. The first time that Texas got medical marijuana was back in 2015, and there has been a significant expansion of the Texas medical marijuana program as of 2021. So what year did you start considering accessing medical marijuana, and what was your experience like when you went through it?
First consideration was through the Red Card program for pediatric patients in Colorado.
How old was he, and what year was it?
He was 6, and it was 2013 when I first looked at getting a medical card. And, one of the things for us is like we had a lot of contacts that were moving to Colorado at that time, but for me it wasn't really feasible. We had a son who had a lot of needs and we needed to have family support around us. It just wasn't something that we could consider doing, especially in Colorado. I think at that time a year's residency was required to get a card for a pediatric patient. So when we were looking at some big upcoming health changes if something, dramatic didn't happen for him. So I didn't want to wait that long. So I started in Texas and was started with the black market illicit cannabis and started working at the same time to change the laws in Texas. And then I was kind of on board with trying Texas Compassionate Use Program, even though it was very, very limited. And as soon as it was to begin, I was doing advocacy through the local epilepsy foundation too.
There wasn't any medical marijuana when you were first trying to access this medicine for your son. Let me ask you about the questions that you were faced with when you first started discussing with the doctor that, you would be his first caretaker and that you would take his advice on how to use cannabis for medicine. What kind of recommendations were you given? What kind of questions were you guys throwing around?
Well, he allowed me to come to him with research and then, and discuss. We went in for a visit and it was a great visit where we had long conversation. He said, I think that I'm comfortable having you as my first caregiver. I like to think of physicians and parents, caregivers, and the patient and all of the providers, the care team. And so like if there's a good communication happening there and there's a lot of respect, then you can have these conversations about what's the best thing for your kid or
Mm-hmm.
yourself, if you're an adult. And then make decisions in that way where everybody comes to some sort of agreement about how it's going to move forward. So, I mean, he was great at that. Let me show him research, but I, ultimately did things that he advised rather than, I wanted to do. So my son has really good control with cannabis for a large part of the year, but then he relapses for, I don't know. It varies. Usually around 4 months out of the year he's relapsing, and relapses are pretty difficult. So we kind of, when he's relapsing, communicating with the doctor and what changes to make and try to make those changes to get that seizure control.
It sounds like a lot of trial and error
Oh,
on your
God.
part when it comes to the actual cannabis. So you said that you were coming to him and telling him sort of what had worked from the underground market for you. Was this like making your own tincture out of flowers, making edibles?
Yes.
What was the method of ingestion?
So I made THCA tincture according to the Epsilon Essentials recipe from David Mapes in Toke Signals magazine. It said parents THCA works as well as CBD for children with seizures. And so, I procured some and followed the directions and made it, and it was fantastic. He did not have a seizure the whole time on it. It was 6
Wow.
weeks worth of medication, no seizures the whole time, and he woke up a different kid. He was he was at the point where he wasn't going to be able to speak very much longer, is what the doctors said. That's why we decided to try it. It's like, when we see that kind of regression, it makes you think, okay, there's no going back from this. So we got to do something drastic. And that's what we did. And we gave him his first dose at night. He woke up back to normal, started interacting. And everybody will tell you there's a huge difference in Zach from what he was before, And also, still, whenever we have to deal with relapses, he regresses quite a bit. And so it's really hard.
So when you first start speaking to the doctor about how to do this treatment, there was, like you said, there's no cards in Texas. You don't get a medical marijuana card like you do in many states. It's like a physical card that you put in your wallet and you take to the dispensary and you show them. But that's not what you have in Texas. You said that there's the compassionate use registry,
Yeah.
I assume with the state of everybody who is allowed to order cannabis. How many dispensaries are there? How many producers are there? Where do you order from? Do they deliver to you? How do you do this?
So my son has been a patient to all 3 licensees in Texas. They had different products available, but it was very limited at that time too. It was a CBD only program, and 3 dispensaries
In the whole state of Texas?
in a whole state of Texas. Okay, and so there's ridiculous laws in Texas about how so everybody gets delivery drivers. Tell me how all of the dispensaries are in the Austin area, because they have to sort of centralize in order to reach as many people as they can, for one thing, but also work with the capital and regulatory bodies that they find it's best to be officed there in Austin.
But all in the same place, and they've all got to go across the state?
And
It's
they
huge.
they have to be in their premises before like the end of the day, and so like the person who goes out to make those deliveries has to be out and back before the end
my gosh.
of day.
So let's
So
talk about how big Texas is. Like to drive across Texas is close to an entire day to drive
oh
across
yeah, there's
Texas
people in
and
Texas who
north to
don't have
south.
any access at all, because of the way the
So
law was written. El Paso to Austin, out and back by the time. And so for me, the complications that causes me to have is I have a really limited, they can only deliver to me, and I have a really limited pickup schedule, and that's a big stress for us. It's ridiculous. It's just ridiculous.
that's a
No,
really crazy way to do it.
yeah, I have my pickup hours where I can go to a place that's relatively close to my home and pick it up between 10 and 2 on one day a week. It's Tuesdays. Or there's a place that's a little bit further. Houston's pretty big, so it takes probably like a half an hour or more to get there. The other one, they like sublet office space from usually,
Ah.
physicians, homeopathic, or people who are okay with having a cannabis dispensary
Yeah.
deliver out of their spare office space, right?
I've never heard of a more complex way of
It's pretty
obtaining
ridiculous. And
natural medicine. I looked up the dispensaries that you guys have out there, and there seem to be way more just CBD shops that have like hemp derived CBD.
oh God, that's another. I mean, I have too many pet peeves in this, right?
Let's
But
not
that's
get into
another.
that. But that's allowed. But for a state that has a registry and then allows a very small number of people with a very short list of ailments to access it, and then they make it incredibly difficult to actually get the products to you in a regular, timely sort of fashion. Let me ask about the cost, because it's got to travel from Austin to anywhere in the rest of the state that it's going to be sold. Is it incredibly expensive to obtain the? I mean, you're only allowed tincture, lozenges, and gummies, but
I know it's more expensive than other states. I know people at both of the operational dispensaries, and there's really only two that are operational in Texas, not three. One of them is
oh,
not operational. The cost, they try to be cost conscious. The thing is, it used to be pretty expensive. I knew somebody who was paying like $1,800 a month for their meds, and I think we were paying like $700 a month. But
wow.
it's come down. Like we pay $160 a month now, so they've got to be bleeding money, like staying operational before they expanded it last session. If you don't add patients, there's no way any of these companies can maintain operational status with how they were functioning, how they had to be functioning, like the expenses, how much licensing costs here, how much it costs to have the security and
Mm.
all the extra requirements, and then have so few patients, and this is one of the big things about it. Nobody knows about the program because every single program the state has a budget for promoting that program, except for Texas Compassionate Use Program. Like they didn't give any money to budgeting, to promoting this program. And so nobody knows about it. And so people are going to the CBD market. So what? I mean, it feels like in Texas, the laws were set up to have people say, see, I told you this was a
Mm.
slippery slope.
I'll second the fact that nobody in Texas really knows that there's medical marijuana,
Yeah.
because I've had so many of my old friends reach out to me and ask me, should I go to this CBD shop? Is this stuff safe? And I'm like, what are you treating? And they're like, PTSD. I'm like, that's a medical condition in Texas. You can actually get a
Yeah.
medical recommendation. You can get cannabis. Let's talk about the kind of cannabis. There are so many rules in Texas that
Mhm.
nothing over 1% THC is allowed. And like you said, only edibles, tinctures, and lozenges. So it's very, very restrictive what you can get. And if that is the right medicine for you or your child, then of course that is a huge, huge access point. But the fact that it's under 1% THC, I think you're right. A lot of folks are going to go for that medicine to the illicit market, because THC is very much a medicine, and if you remove it from the regulated market,
Yeah.
people are going to find it elsewhere.
Also, it took a long time for people to realize that too. People even in advocacy were surprised that, like,
Yeah.
I can get a THC chocolate bar, you know, but you can.
Yeah.
And it's just, you have to kind of eat a lot more.
So let's talk about the advocacy side of this. The advocacy progress is very important. I know that there was cities like Denton and Killeen that voted just a few months ago to sort of decriminalize cannabis, but there are some city leaders pushing back. So is that sort of the feel across the whole state where folks want to see progress, but the leadership is pushing back?
Yes. Yep. Very proud of my friends who started those movements in those cities. But yeah, no, there's a lot of really strong advocates in Texas, not just strong advocates like in the cannabis movement, but there's a lot of advocates in Texas are Republicans, which isn't typical in a lot of states, I think. And so a lot of them are involved in their party politics anyways. They got it on the party plank, like I think back in 2017, but it didn't matter, you know. I think it was like the 10th priority or something like that. And so that's a big deal, so that all of the people who are in all of the internal governance within the Republican Party decided it was a priority to address this issue, medical cannabis. But the legislators still wouldn't do it. And they still, you know, I mean, hopefully they're coming around to it now. We'll see. The thing is, we just need to we need to stop pushing people to unregulated and possibly dangerous options when we have the ability to provide them with something that's safe.
Absolutely. And if there's anything that I know about Texas, it's that there's a great belief in personal freedom.
Yes.
There's also, you know, everything's done real big out there. There's a lot of money. There's a lot of money to be had in medical marijuana. There's a lot of personal independence to be had. So I believe that it's in line with a lot of people's beliefs that it should be made more accessible. Piper, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. And thank you for all your advocacy in Texas. All my exes live in Texas. I love Texas. Texas is my home in America.
Well, if you're in the Houston area.
Oh, I'll be around. Yeah. Oh, you know it.
Sounds good.
Thanks to this week's guests from Florida, New Hampshire, and Texas. And just a heads up, the story out of how they deliver around the whole state of Texas was so intriguing to us that we're going to be delving deeper into the Lone Star State's medical cannabis world in an upcoming podcast episode that'll come out later this year. So make sure you're subscribed wherever you're listening right now so you don't miss that one. Next week, we'll be traveling back to my home country of jolly old England to learn how medical cannabis is being done in the UK and to see what the US could learn from how the Brits do it with cannabis nurse Sophie Hayes.
A patient can only get a cannabis prescription for a 28-day period in the UK. At the end of that 28-day period, they need to be reviewed by a clinical professional. So it doesn't have to be the specialist doctor, it can be a nurse. So a lot of the nurses will spend a lot of their time with their caseload is following up each month, either with a phone call or with a video call to see how that patient is doing.
Be sure to like and subscribe to the show wherever you're listening right now and follow us on social media at Different Leaf, and I'm on social media at Brit the British. Check out differentleaf.com for all the issues of our gorgeous magazine, including my latest article on page 62 in the latest winter medical issue about the pros and cons of getting your own medical marijuana card. That's available at differentleaf.com and on thousands of shelves across the US and Canada at select Barnes & Noble bookstores, Walmarts, CVS pharmacies, and cannabis dispensaries. Also, remember to mosey on over to xdifferentleaf.com to get signed up for our stunning new merch line. That's differentleaf.com and xdifferentleaf.com.